Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to this Thursday's evenings Erudition Network Black History and Knowledge session. I am Eddie Phillips. If this is your first time watching this program is dedicated to teaching Black history and providing knowledge on Black history that you may not have learned in school or those things that have also been hidden from us and not generally talked about. We do this show every Thursday night at 5 Mountain Time, 6 o'clock Central Standard Time, to provide a historical background to what's going on today, and also to touch back on those things, as I said, that we may not have learned. Tonight, I want to, my intention today was to go into women's suffrage because it is the last day or my last episode before the end of Women's Month. And so I wanted to go into that. However, I had a couple of problems in bringing over a couple of things. So as we go through this, we'll make do and do what we can to go over this information. I'm going to give a couple of moments for people to come in but I always tell people, if you can't join the live session, please feel free to leave a comment, response, or something during the playback when you watch it on YouTube or Facebook. Those are just as welcome, and I do appreciate any comments, questions that you may have on any of the subjects that we discuss on Erudition. I really wanted to go into women's suffrage because of a message that I received from a viewer who had watched a documentary, which typically happens on Amazon. And I did my due diligence and I sat down, and I watched the same documentary. And the question that the individual had was, he was unaware of the racial issues that had taken place during the suffrage movement. And I know that I have touched on those things before. At least I believe that I have. We've done about 2 years of episodes. Actually, no, we're at 3 years right now of this Erudition history. And in doing these shows, I know that I've talked, because here's the reason why I know that I've talked about it, is because we talk a lot about the things that happened in the early 1900s, because it's a significant time for African Americans. And so we talked about those things because when you look at Red Summer, when you look at the Garveyists, with Marcus Garvey, when you look at the forming of the NAACP, when you look at these were people who had come of age after the Civil War and Reconstruction. And the country was in the middle of a major change. America had gone into a world war, World War One. We had the Spanish flu. There were a lot of things that were going on during that time. Women's suffrage is only one of those things, but it plays a significant part in that history because the problem that was expressed with women's suffrage, you had people who were suffragists who were abolitionists. And they were abolitionists before the Civil War. They were abolitionists during the Civil War. And when the amendments were passed to give to free slaves and then to later give them the vote, many of the suffragists switched around and changed over. It goes along with the same idea that Dr. King talked about once in saying that just because they wanted you to be free, it didn't mean that they wanted you to be equal. And many of the heroes of the suffragist movement, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, different individuals like her, Carrie Chapman Catt later on, these women wanted their equality, but they did not want that equality along with Black people, Black women. Not completely. Their issue was that because the country was going through all of these changes that we just talked about a few moments ago, they weren't willing to give up the idea of them having their rights to vote, right, fall short. So they were willing to throw, even though there were Black women like Ida B. Wells, Sojourner Truth, even Harriet Tubman in her latter years, Frederick Douglass as a man, even though they had major African Americans or Black Americans who were trying to help them, people like Alice Paul and all of these other people, they quickly saw the math and decided that many times they did not want these women or these Black people to be a part of it. As a matter of fact, when it came down to after the Civil War, there was rhetoric that showed many Black people who had fought right alongside, who had done meetings with people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was one of the original architects, if not the original architect, of women's suffrage in America. She decided that she was not, once African American men were given the vote, she decided that she didn't want to have anything to do with African Americans. And yet you still hear people rail about Elizabeth Cady Stanton. You still hear people talk about how much, she should be remembered. She's still put down in certain places as an abolitionist. But, history shows that was not who she was. That was not who she was. And even though her own daughter, even though her protege, Susan B. Anthony, right? All of these people, we rail against the Susan B. Anthony coins. Remember, as you got older, everybody had their Susan B. Anthony's. We still tote these women up when they showed you who they really were. And I can understand why, when you watch documentaries or you see something, right? How you could be just blown away. How you could say to yourself, wait, whoa, I thought these were great people, honorable people. When they put Susan B. Anthony's face on a coin, but remember, Susan B. Anthony was the one that said she would cut off her right arm before she would ever work or demand a ballot for the Negro and not the women. That's what she said. It's not that they didn't want Black women's money, Black women's participation. When they had the Seneca Falls meeting, which your children are taught about, they are taught about Seneca Falls and how that started the suffrage movement here in America. What had happened in 1848. But let's not live under the shadow of the thought that women, class, and race meant the same things to some of these suffragists. There's a quote. I wrote down some of their quotes. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, when asked about Black male suffrage, Black males getting the vote. And this is an abolitionist now that said this. It becomes a serious question whether we had better stand aside and let Sambo walk into the kingdom first. That's what she said. As we look through all of these women, Margaret Sanger, who is one of the founders and the masterminds of Planned Parenthood, who played into the idea of eugenics. These are people who were a part of these movements, right? Margaret Sanger, again, one of these suffragists who said more children from fit and less from the unfit, who believed that it was okay to sterilize Black men and Black women. But we are given the suffragist movement as if it's some heroic thing with these women. And we forget that by the time that women's suffrage was legal, that a lot of it was because coming out of World War I, Woodrow Wilson, who was one of our most racist presidents, if not the most racist, the man who entertained the Klan, the actual KKK, in the White House. We forget that Woodrow Wilson decided to work with the suffragists. Toward the end of getting things ratified, he sat down and worked with Carrie Chapman Catt. And one of the things that was discussed was keeping the Negro out of the mix. Woodrow Wilson, who was so racist and actually started to cut off, he's one of the people that in the early 1900s, the 1910s, decided to segregate the government. Black people who had been given jobs after Reconstruction, he removed them from those major positions. We have to understand that all of these things work together. But yet, as we go through history books, as we go through history, we're told that equality by the measure of American equality is what the suffrage movement was about. That's what we're told. When they made their march in Washington, there was major. This was before the inauguration of Woodrow Wilson. When the women made their march down Pennsylvania Avenue, this huge march that was the mastermind, right? The mastermind of Carrie Chapman Catt, who was the head of this suffrage movement, and the young militant Alice Paul. People attacked them. They attacked these women. And what I find reprehensible and crazy, but yet again a sign of American history, is that before the march started, the Illinois delegation of the suffragists, Ida B. Wells, was and her black suffragists were told that they could not march. Now, they took their dues money. They took their efforts to get laws passed in certain states. People look at suffrage as if it all happened at one time. And we need to remember that in the West, and then later on in some parts of the Midwest, suffrage was given. And it was given because of the money and the effort put in, not just by white women, but also by black women. It was a no-go in the South. States like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, yeah, obviously they weren't going to pass suffrage, because in their mind, passing suffrage would mean that they would have to admit that what they were doing to blacks and disenfranchisement was wrong. And the suffragists were willing to allow racist Southerners to continue what they were doing as long as they could get the majority of the country to pass the law. There were a lot of things going on during this time. And unfortunately, as we often say on here, at the heart of all of that was race. It was race. Give me a moment here. I often I look and I say to myself, why is it that America suffers so much in the way that it does? And why does America fight its history so much? Why is it? It can't just simply be race. But I'm always heartbroken because it really comes down to it. It really comes down to it. Woodrow Wilson was such a negative president. It wasn't just that Woodrow Wilson um, was racist against blacks. Woodrow Wilson was a sexist. He didn't really want women's suffrage to go through. The only reason that he finally bent over towards it was because of the amount of people in the country and other Western states that had gone along with suffrage. And he saw that he needed these women to vote. But here's the other catch. He needed them to vote in the way he wanted them to vote. Wilson saw the writing on the wall when other racist Democrats did not. His boys in the South, his boys, the Ku Klux Klanmen, in the second birth of the Klan. He was okay with the terrorism that was going on. He had no problem with that. That wasn't the issue. The issue was keeping America at a standard where they needed it to be after World War I. See, when you go overseas and you fight and you go through all of the things that the country went through, it's very hard to say you are a democracy, that you are a democracy when you are keeping freedoms from people based on race and sex. But that's what they were doing. And in order to bring about some form of what I would say to look as if they were doing more than what they were doing, there had to be a give. There had to be a give. Suffrage was that give. What were they going to really lose from that? What were they really going to lose from it? It should not be removed from you that during the time of the ratification of women's suffrage, the country was going through Red Summer. And that during that summer of Red Summer, 1919, violence, lynchings, murders, immolations, which is burning people, all of these things were being done in the country. And the world was looking. As Wilson was trying to grow this idea of America, right, being this democracy, these women were standing in front of the White House with signs talking about disenfranchisement. And Wilson, because that's always been the issue with America, it's never the issue of doing something because the right is the right. It's always because of a need, of a forced need. Wilson understood he had to do something. He understood that he could not simply ignore these women. And so what he did was he decided, let's let them get the vote. Let's give them the vote. Because what is it going to lose us? And immediately after receiving that vote, the country spiraled even more into racism. into violent, vile racism. The rise of the Second Klan saw lynchings all over the country. In the East, in the Midwest, in the West, in the South. Black women and men were being killed en masse. And many times, the killings were justified because of what they perceived was going to happen to women. These same women who had been abolitionists, their grandmothers had been abolitionists. These same women who marched down roads doing and pleaded for their rights. These same women hold on a second. I don't know how better to say it. You go look at 1921, go look at what happened in Tulsa. This is after women's suffrage. This is during the time, right? In 1920, when the 19th Amendment guaranteed the rights for all American women to vote, it wasn't all American women. Black women were still being told they could not vote. They were still being disenfranchised. Violence was rising everywhere. Imperialistic thoughts. People in America who felt that blacks had to be contained. These very same women who had said that they were going to fight for equality meant equality for them, not equality for everybody. So I can understand how watching a documentary, because I watched the documentary, I think it's on PBS, and they went a little bit. They went a little bit into some of the racial history and some of the vile things that were done, but not enough to touch on it. Oh yeah, they told Ida B. Wells not to march, but she later marched anyway. No, what this really was about is the lie that is often told in America. The early 1900s, right, were a mess. It is why we are where we are right now. It is why. When you see the suffragists marching down Pennsylvania Avenue in this huge parade and dressed in their white, and I wanted to have some of that footage, couldn't bring it over. And all of these thousands of women showed up and told Black women that they couldn't march. And they were upset because men were throwing things at them and disrespecting them. And you move ahead about 4 years, 4 to 5 years. And now you have 30,000 white supremacists in white too, in sashes, marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, showing the strength of the Second Klan. All of this stuff did not happen in a vacuum. All of this stuff didn't happen randomly. It happened because that's where the country was. Equality, unfortunately, even when I hear it today, is not very often for Black people. That's what it is. I got 4 people on here today. You guys been very quiet, and that's okay. I don't expect people to say much, but if there are any thoughts on this subject, again, did this episode because I try very hard to answer you all when I get questions and things and about these issues, because I truly believe that it moves us away from mistruths, lies, and misinformation. And that's a goal of mine in doing this show every Thursday. We have to get away from the disinformation. So much of it is out here. And we really got to do better. We really got to do better. Trying to see if I could move some stuff here. Give me one moment here. It won't let me. But, you look at these images of the suffragists marching down through Washington, and then you look at the Klan marching, and it's almost impossible. And I don't want to do a disservice, but it really is almost impossible to not see the similarities. It's almost impossible not to see how very close they looked to each other and what they were doing. Because in the end of it, some of the same people were marching. Some of the same people were marching down the roads and doing everything just in the same way. And also telling Black people you're not wanted. Telling them that they don't need to be there. I pulled up too. Let me see if I can move some of this over, because I really want to show what I'm talking about here. Wouldn't let me do this earlier. All right, here we go. So I was telling you earlier that Wilson, Woodrow Wilson, he this is the visual that was being done, where the suffragists went in front of the White House. It was one of the first times people started to picket right in front of the White House. And they went there and they sat outside the White House during this time of the year. It was around the end of winter going into the spring. It was very cold. And they sat there and picketed and called Wilson out on the fact that he was not really for democracy, right? And yet as we have talked about just a few moments ago, this equality wasn't for everybody. I give them credit for standing out there in the cold. Right? I give them credit. But I must also point out that they were not doing this. They were not doing this for Black people. And we need to stop with the lie that it was for everybody. Even though we say that racism and sexism was bounded together, that was not the way. That was not the way that they saw it. Alice Paul would be willing to be force-fed, beaten, to get white women the right to vote. But she would not do that for Blacks. And more than once, history shows, more than once, she threw Black people under the bus. Even though her idea was that women should have the vote, she didn't. This wasn't her feeling. Despite what you may read from the Alice Paul Institute, despite what you may read from the suffragist institutes, that's the true history. That's the true history. She was the mastermind behind this very thing that you see. She was the mastermind who told Ida B. Wells and others that you're not wanted here. That was her. Now, she couldn't have done it alone, right? She had others who sided with her. But if not for people like Mary Church Terrell, Ida B. Wells, who went out despite knowing, compromised sometimes when they shouldn't have, to help these women get the vote because they believed that these women, once given the vote, would fight for them. And they didn't. They didn't. And that's the unfortunate rub there. That's the unfortunate rub there. Disbelief. Let's look at these pictures. I pulled up a couple of the marches, and let's actually look at some of these pictures in comparison. So if you look at this picture here, I'm going to show you two. First one is this. This is the suffragists marching with their woman on a horse down Pennsylvania Avenue. Right? That's them. And they're all dressed in white. Some are later in black later on in the back. But for the most part, that's what you see, right? You see them marching. Let me show you the other one. Because I want you to understand that this is all within the same time period. This is them again, right? And their regalia, marching for rights. And I'm making this point because I want to show you that I'm not making this up. Now, I only pulled up one of these. I could pull up many more that look even more, but let's look at this right here. This is the Klan. This is when the Klan marched down those same streets in all white. No more than 3 to 4 years after you saw the women marching. And a lot of the people who marched for the Klan in the second birth of the Klan, a lot of those marchers were women who had just been given rights, and they turned and flipped on those same people who they said this was about equality. The lie is right there in front of your face, and our kids are taught these lies. Over and over again in their books, in their history books. And then when we fight against it, when we say, hey, we don't want this taught, this is crap, teach it in fact, teach it in truth, they tell us that it's hurting white children's feelings. That's the truth. All right. I don't know if anybody is engaged. Today. I know I'm feeling a little down. I'm trying not to bring that energy to what we're talking about today. It is disturbing. I mean, these are atrocities. These are horrible things to talk about. Not something that, that you enjoy. And you say, well, we're talking about it on Women's History Month. Because during Women's History Month, one of the things that they talk about often and they throw in front of our face is this idea of women's suffrage. And we have to educate our children on the truth of it. Those women in the Black Women's Club movement, the Ida B. Wells, those women were ignored. They were ignored. They gave time, effort to a movement that went on for the better part of 80 years. Even the movement was being done before Blacks could even say they were free. And these people, these women, they fought, 2 generations fought just to be betrayed. To have situations like Rosewood, like Tulsa, to be betrayed over and over and over again, to watch the passing of law, and then to go into Red Summer and see things that happen in Cadwell, Georgia, and Newberry, South Carolina, and New York, and Texas, San Francisco, Connecticut. Watching Black people be killed left and right. And then watching white women who had obtained the vote, who said that they were with you, that you bled with, marched with, not try to do anything to help you. And in fact, make racist statements in order to secure white people's thoughts that they were not necessarily trying to push a Negro understanding. Separate but equal. I hope that we get some comments on this on the replay because nobody's saying anything tonight. And that's okay. That's okay. But as I said, I know that this is not something that many people study. But it affects you. It affects you even now. Other than African Americans and the people of color, the beings who benefited the most from all bills of civil rights and equal treatment under the law were women, predominantly white women. When Elizabeth Cady Stanton and them met at Seneca Falls, they talked about how a white woman couldn't own property. She had no rights. Right? They talked about how they were second-class citizens, if citizens at all. They were no better than the slave. But as blacks and people of color got more and more, as they got more and more and more rights, those rights bled over to equalize women, white women. And even though it was on the books, on paper, that there should have been equality, unfortunately, for a lot of African Americans, a lot of blacks, it was just on paper. That was white women with their husband. I will say this to you, that when black people were given the vote, black men were given the vote, a lot of them, the vote was a family thing. We know that from the narratives. We know that from the history that has been shared down. They would have church meetings. They would get together. And the families would vote. They would vote as a family. They would discuss it. Many white men said that the vote was not something that a woman should have. He was talking about his sister, his mother, his wife. That's how we felt. Ratification of the 19th Amendment happened in Tennessee, and it only happened because two of the Texas legislature, two members of the legislature who had said they were not going to vote for it, decided that they would. And one of them, from his own record, did it because his mother wrote him a letter he was 20-something years old. He's a young man. To vote against his party and vote and give these women the vote. Carrie Chapman Catt thought that they had lost the vote. She had thought that this was it. This was done. Because there was bribes. There were things going on all the way leading up to the ratification. If they didn't get it ratified, they did what? 36 states. And it was a fight. And this one young man who was hated by his party after decided that it's what he would do to please his mother. That's how dire the idea of equality, to even give it to women, I'm not dismissing the idea that these women um, did not have the right to vote as citizens. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying tonight is that they had the right. They fought for the right for the better part of over 70 years. And then what they did was, once they were given that right, the very women who fought right beside them, the women of color who stood there and paid their dues to their associations and marched with them and organized with them, they turned their backs on them. That's what they did. And as unfortunate as that was, that's what happened. I don't know um, why we won't teach. That's what I should say. I don't know why we won't teach the events of the 1910s and 20s correctly. I even hear a lot of times Black historians, they don't teach it correctly. And you say, well, Eddie, what is correctly? In honesty. You're not teaching it in honesty. There's so much heroification. There's so much out here that's just lies. We're not teaching history correctly. We're telling people things and letting them believe things as if that's the way it was, when we know that that wasn't it. We know that that wasn't it. And that breakage in time, right? Post Reconstruction, the beginning of the Second Industrial Revolution, where we had railroads and factories and the rise of skyscrapers and city states, new inventions everywhere, the flooding in of immigrants. The country was changing. Progressivism. But at the heart of all of it, while all that was going on, racism. They did. That is true. That is true. But the agenda was never for us. There's a reason why Marcus Garvey marched. We tend to forget that in 1917, that Garvey had over almost 10,000 African Americans marched on a silent protest in New York City. We forget the power of the NAACP at that time with W.E.B. Du Bois putting out the crisis every day and talking about the lynchings and the murders. We forget about, and I keep bringing her name up because it is true, we forget the work of Ida B. Wells and her writings, and having to leave the South to come to the north, to Chicago, because of the amount of lynchings that were going on. But yet these people stood up because they wanted to believe that there were people who wanted equality. And when you say they use their money and their numbers to push the agenda, that is absolutely correct. But the industrialists at the same time, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, JP Morgan, they also wanted to educate us. This is where the revisionism comes in. Those schools that were open, and no, I love HBCUs. Many of them were open to keep things separate but equal. To keep a certain status quo in the United States with the education of the blacks and people of color. And overall theft of black ideas, inventions, from Edison, Carnegie, all of these people, you look and you see how much was stolen. The lie. And as I said, I know it's not fun to go into this. I know that many people don't like to talk about it. But that's what these Thursday episodes are about. Sometimes we got to talk about these things. Sometimes we got to really get into it. All right, we're coming down to the last 4 minutes of this episode. If you are one of the people, which I hope you will, who will watch this later on, please leave a comment, some thoughts on what we covered tonight. If you have a question of me and say, well, Eddie, why is it that we needed to talk about suffragists and the racism of the suffragists? Please drop that question, however it applies to you. And we'll talk about that. But I will tell you, for me, I get tired of the lie. I get tired of hearing people lauded in history without the full understanding of who they are. Whole book chapters dedicated to the memory of Susan B. Anthony. Whole books dedicated to it. To a woman who had been an abolitionist. In other words, she didn't want you in slavery. Or the vote of a black person. And historians can lie and tell you, oh, they weren't like that. Their own words condemn them, their own quotes in their newspapers. I don't want to be under the Elizabeth Cady Stanton. I don't want to be under the foot of the Sambo. The ignorant black should not decide what I should be able to do. These so-called friends of Frederick Douglass, who came to many early suffragist rallies and temperance movement rallies before he passed to fight for these very people. They didn't take away those black dollars, but they were really quick to make it known when it came down to the legal possibility of getting their rights to throw our ancestors right under the bus. And unfortunately, as I close this session, it's still happening today. And if we do not learn from the past, we repeat it. we repeat it. We keep telling ourselves lies about these people and creating heroification that is not real. And it's bad. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, if you have anything, we had a very quiet audience today, but if you have anything to leave comments, thoughts, concerns, whatever, please do so. I will try to be back on here Saturday to do the wrap up Saturday evening. We try to do a wrap up that we talk about all of the things, different programs that we have on the network during the week. We'll try to get that on here Saturday night around 7 o'clock, I believe it is 7 o'clock Central Standard Time, and get on 6 o'clock Mountain Time to discuss these things, and we'll see how that plays out this week. Thank you for the few who actually came on and asked questions and left comments. Yes, today's topics covered women's suffrage movement. Leave any comments, as I said. We really do appreciate them. And I will see you all Saturday. And if not on Saturday, then we will see you again come next week on next Thursday's episode. Drop a line on the Erudition page, whether it be our Facebook page, or whether it be in the comments on YouTube, or rather you go to our actual website, leave a comment, leave a thought. Maybe we can cover something that you question in history that you have, that you really want. Maybe you want to debate something in history. By all means, we can do that too, and allow you to speak whatever and opine on whatever you want to talk about. That's what the interactive is about. All right, I've belabored you all enough. Until next week, have a good one. Be blessed. Thank you.